but it will happen. And when it does happen, that's going to be even worse for the housing market, and that will start the next leg down in the housing market, which could be even more catastrophic. Has the bubble burst? That's what we're going to get into in this video. When I think about a housing market crash, I basically think it happens in 4 stages. You know, when a bubble bursts, first stage that you have is the speculative stage. You have this massive drive into speculation. Everybody just goes completely insane. And actually, by definition, this is called the new paradigm phase of a bubble. So during that phase, you essentially have people just go completely insane. So think about it. During 2021, this was the time that everybody thought the housing market can't crash. We just survived this awful pandemic. And if housing was going to crash, it would have crashed during that pandemic. And guess what? It didn't crash. So everybody just buy housing. Housing is just going to go up forever. The government saved the market. The central planners, the authoritarians, they got it right. And it just means that this market is indestructible. And we kind of saw that narrative emerge in 2021. We saw people just go completely insane when it came to the housing market. The second stage is essentially the denial phase. And that was what we saw last year. It's when the bubble starts to pop, you have that first leg down, and of course everybody is in denial about what's going on, and that causes an effect of low inventory, a product that then causes the next stage of when a bubble bursts, which is the return to normal phase. And enter 2023 in the housing market. This is exactly where we are right now. We're in this return to normal phase, and we see this narrative all the time put out there by realtors. We see it on Twitter. Twitter is a great barometer to look at emotions in the stock market, in the housing market, because you see what people are putting out, all the nonsense that people are spewing, including myself. And it's really funny to look at it. It's kind of a spectacle that we can look at to gauge people's emotions and what's going on. And the funny thing is, during last year, you saw that denial phase of the housing market's not going to crash. And then enter this year, you saw a lot of people say, actually, it is going to crash. And then that's when the return to normal phase started, which is kind of funny and ironic. And the funny thing is about the return to normal phase is you have to understand it's part of the bubble cycle. And the thing is, when you see these different stages come into play one after another, you can actually be more confident that the bubble is actually bursting. So we've seen this bubble that has played out for a long time. We've seen this cycle of credit that has played out for a long time. People just taking on more and more risk till they get to the point where they've got so much credit they just can't afford to pay back all that credit. And that's essentially where we're at now. People can't even afford the interest payments on their mortgage. They took out that much debt. The other thing, during this new paradigm phase, which is the first stage, you essentially have fraud and all these kind of different things that just ramp up. So you have a massive amount of fraud that enters into the market. You have people just taking insane risks, stacking investment property behind investment property behind investment property, people going crazy into Airbnbs. And that's exactly what we saw. The lack of acknowledgement of risk has kind of been the most shocking thing for me. And somebody who's traveled around, who's looked at the market in the US, in the UK, in Mexico, and other countries in Central America, I can tell you that they are exhibiting the same bubble behavior, the same bubble symptoms that Canada is exhibiting as well. And that's because most of the countries have took similar steps with monetary policy. They lowered rates, even if it wasn't to as low, and then they jacked up rates, and it caused a massive tightening of credit. And the funny thing is, now we're heading into a recession. I mean, I believe we're in a recession. If you don't believe we're in a recession, you've got got to believe we're heading towards one. And the last component, the last domino to fall in a recession cycle is in fact employment. So everybody's looking around right now, it's the calm before the storm, and they're thinking, where's this employment? Luke, you've been talking about this employment for over a year and it hasn't happened, but it will happen. And when it does happen, that's going to be even worse for the housing market, and that will start the next leg down in the housing market, which could be even more catastrophic. It could be absolutely insane, the amount of volatility that we would see in the housing market, because now it's not only that you've got people speculating with rental properties, you've got people speculating with Airbnb. I mean, the amount of inventory, both rental inventory and housing inventory, that is tied up in Airbnb, that is essentially the travel sector. It's essentially people are hotel managers, they just don't know it, who own these Airbnbs. So they really need to be looking at the economy, seeing where the economy's going. We know all the economic indicators are flashing red, the yield curve's inverted. We've got the most predictable things, the most predictable signs telling us that we're heading into a massive recession. Yet you've got people still out there right now, today probably, buying Airbnbs thinking everything's going to be fine, I'm going to be okay, I'm a real estate investor, I'm not an Airbnb person. I mean, that's not me. And those people have took insane risks and they've just distorted things to the absolute maximum. And you know, the funny thing is, guys, you see these patterns play out, like in Mexico, for example. You've had a lot of Mexicans that have got involved with the Airbnb fiasco. So they took out mortgages and they've bought Airbnbs and they've been making good money with it. But when the tourism dries up, when the demand dries up, because most of the demand comes from the US, those economies are heading into recession. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to be in trouble likely with their own job. So the chances of them being able to pay the mortgage goes down. And not only that, they're also going to have the flip side to it, which is the demand is going to be so low, they're not going to be making any money. So they're going to be hit by two angles. And it's not just people in Mexico. The reason I'm using that as an example is because we've just seen how insane monetary policy has been, how insane things have gotten over the past couple of years. And it's really just been the cycle of an end stage of a bubble. I think we can all admit that for the past 10-20 years, we have sort of been in this speculative bubble, which started with the dot-com bubble, and then it changed to the 2008 global financial crisis. And each time something has failed, they have essentially engineered another way to inflate a bubble in a different area. And now we've got to the point which it's the everything bubble. Everything is a bubble. There's nothing left to inflate anymore. It has to go down. And we saw this with Japan. This happened in Japan. And I highly recommend that you read up on the history of Japan, because it's really, really interesting to take a look at that, to realize how long the pain could actually last for this. Just realize that you're in this speculative bubble, and you know, there is small chances that they could do other things. I mean, there's probably a chance that they could do something even more completely insane. But let's face it, is that really going to fix the problem, or is that just going to kick the can down the road for a couple of years? Because as we saw with 2020, they are running out of lives, and I think they've run out of lives now, because the cycles are getting so close together and the amount of money they're needing to inject is getting so high that it's actually causing consumer price inflation, and that is what typically causes the end of a bubble. So, you know, the funny thing about Canada in particular is it has built so much of an economy around the housing market, which in my opinion is just a disaster. They could have built a much stronger economy around all the commodities that this country is rich in, but they chose the housing market. They chose to get more speculative, and that was what they really chose to pump, that and private debt during 2008 to prevent the pain from the financial crisis entering in. And other countries that chose to do that, Australia and New Zealand, will also feel the full force of all these crises hit at the same time. It's going to be immensely interesting to see what happens, and we'll see and continue to monitor it. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video here. You might also like this video here. If you like these kind of outdoors walk and talks, then let me know in the comments below. It'd be great to hear from you. I'm planning on doing more of them if people like them. I don't know. I'm just trying to try new things things for you guys. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourself.